Nova Ironhold had always known her father was a coward. She had watched him bend his knee to stronger alphas, watched him sacrifice dignity for survival, watched him trade away pieces of their pack's honor like coins spent at market. But standing in the great hall of Ironhold Keep, surrounded by the cold stone walls that had sheltered her for 23 years, she finally understood the full depth of his weakness. He couldn't even look at her. "The tribute has been agreed upon," her father announced, his voice carrying across the hall with false authority. The gathered pack members shifted, whispers rippling through them like wind through dead leaves. "As payment for our transgressions against the Ashford kingdom, we will send one of our own, a daughter of noble blood." Nova's stomach turned to ice. She felt the words before he spoke them, felt them in the way her stepmother's lips curved with barely concealed satisfaction, in the way her younger brother Caden's face went pale as snow. "Nova will depart at dawn." The hall erupted. Caden lurched forward, his 15-year-old voice cracking as he shouted their father's name. Two guards caught him, holding him back as tears streamed down his cheeks. "You can't! Father, you can't send her to them. They'll kill her. They'll—" Silence. Alpha Roderick Ironhold's command rippled with the barest edge of power, enough to quiet his son, but not enough to hide the tremor in his own hands. "The decision is made." Nova stood motionless, her wolf eerily still inside her chest. She should feel something. Rage, terror, betrayal. Instead, there was only a hollow numbness spreading through her limbs, as if her body had already begun to die. 3 years. The thought surfaced through the fog. 3 years since the failed rebellion, and now they finally named their price. She remembered that night. The fire on the horizon, the screaming, her mother's blood pooling on the kitchen floor where she'd been caught by Ashford soldiers. Roderick had surrendered within hours, groveling at the feet of King Eric's general, begging for mercy. The Ashford kingdom had granted it, demanding only ongoing tribute, grain, gold, soldiers for their campaigns. But apparently, that hadn't been enough. "You knew." Nova's voice emerged flat and strange, cutting through the murmurs. Her father flinched. "How long have you known they wanted a person instead of provisions?" Roderick's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter." "How long?" "6 months." Her stepmother Vera answered when her father wouldn't. The woman's dark eyes gleamed with triumph poorly masked as pity. "We've been negotiating, trying to find another way. But King Eric was specific. He wanted noble blood, a woman of breeding age." The implication slithered through Nova's mind, leaving trails of ice in its wake. Breeding age. They weren't just sending her as a servant or a hostage, they were sending her as livestock. A womb to be used, a body to be broken, a life to be consumed by the enemy who had already taken everything else. "I could refuse," Nova said softly. "I could run." "You could." Vera's smile sharpened. "But then the treaty dies. Ashford's army marches within the month. Everyone here, your brother, your cousins, the children in the nursery, they all pay for your selfishness." She spread her hands in mock helplessness. "Or you go quietly, and our pack survives another generation. The choice is yours, really." It wasn't a choice. It had never been a choice. Nova looked at her father one last time, searching for something. Regret, shame, even a flicker of the man who had once carried her on his shoulders through summer festivals. But Roderick Ironhold stared at the floor, his cowardice written in every line of his hunched shoulders. "I'll need to pack," she said. The next 24 hours passed in fragments. Nova moved through her childhood home like a ghost, gathering possessions she wouldn't be allowed to keep, saying goodbyes that felt like funeral rites. Caden clung to her in the garden, his thin body shaking with sobs he couldn't control. "I'll come for you," he whispered fiercely. "When I'm old enough, when I'm Alpha, I'll bring an army. I'll burn their whole kingdom to the ground." Nova smoothed his dark hair, memorizing the shape of his face. "You'll do no such thing. You'll survive. You'll be smarter than father, stronger than father. Promise me." He promised through tears that neither of them believed. At dawn, they put her in a cage. The iron bars were cold against Nova's palms as the cart jolted over rutted roads, carrying her away from everything she had ever known. They hadn't even given her a proper seat, just loose straw scattered over wooden planks, like she was an animal being transported to slaughter. Perhaps she was. The journey took 6 days. 6 days of cold nights and colder stares from the Ashford soldiers escorting her. 6 days of barely enough food. Water passed through bars like she was a feral creature they feared might bite. 6 days of watching the landscape change from Ironhold's familiar forests to the dark volcanic mountains of Ashford territory. By the 3rd day, something began growing inside her. A feeling she had spent 6 months trying to ignore. The nausea hit harder now, without distractions to push it away. She pressed her hand flat against her belly, acknowledging the truth she had hidden even from herself. She was pregnant. The father, Marcus, a visiting beta from a neighboring pack, had left before she'd even realized. A few stolen nights of rebellion against Vera's constant surveillance, desperate attempts to feel something other than trapped. Now those nights had given her a secret she couldn't reveal. If the Ashford king learned she carried another man's child, Nova's throat tightened. She would be killed. Or worse, the baby would be torn from her, discarded like inconvenient evidence. "I will protect you," she thought fiercely, her palm pressing harder against her still flat stomach. "Whatever it takes, whatever I have to become, you will survive this." On the 6th day, the obsidian palace rose from the mountainside like a blade thrust toward heaven. Nova had heard stories about the Ashford seat of power, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. Black stone towers spiraled impossibly high, their surfaces catching light and throwing it back in fractured rainbows. The gates were wrought iron twisted into the shapes of wolves, their metal eyes seeming to track the approaching cart. Everything about this place screamed of ancient power, of magic so deeply woven into the stone that it had become inseparable from the architecture itself. This was the den of monsters. The soldiers dragged her from the cage roughly, chains already prepared for her wrists and ankles. The iron bit into her skin, leaving marks that would bruise by nightfall. She stumbled on legs weakened by days of confinement, but she refused to fall. She would not give them the satisfaction. "Move, tribute." The captain's voice held contempt as thick as tar. "The king wants to inspect his new property." Property? The word burned in Nova's chest. She had been many things in her life: daughter, sister, healer in training, embarrassment to her stepmother. But she had never been a thing, had never been reduced to flesh and function, a body without personhood. She was now. They marched her through corridors of black stone and silver filigree, past servants who stared and courtiers who whispered behind glittering hands. Nova kept her gaze forward, her spine straight despite the weight of the chains. The numbness that had protected her in the great hall had cracked apart somewhere on the journey, replaced by something harder: defiance. If she was going to die in this place, she would die standing. She would not weep, would not beg, would not give these cruel strangers the satisfaction of seeing her broken. They could take her body, her freedom, her future. They would not take her pride. The throne room doors loomed before her, twice her height, carved with scenes of wolf hunts and ancient battles. Guards flanked either side, their expressions unreadable beneath ceremonial helms. "The tribute from Ironhold," the captain announced. The doors swung open. Nova was pushed forward into a vast chamber of shadow and flame. Torches lined the walls, their light flickering across tapestries depicting the Ashford dynasty's thousand-year reign. Courtiers filled the spaces between pillars, their whispers falling silent as she stumbled into view. And at the far end, elevated on a dais of black marble, sat the Alpha King. Eric Ashford was not what she had expected. The stories painted him as a monster, cruel, ancient, twisted by power into something barely human. But the man on the throne was young, perhaps 30, with sharp features and darker hair that fell across his forehead. His body was built for violence, all coiled muscle and predatory stillness. But his face was beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful. The guards forced Nova to her knees before the throne. The impact sent pain shooting through her joints, but she refused to cry out. Instead, she lifted her chin, meeting the king's gaze with all the defiance she had left. Their eyes locked. Heat exploded through Nova's chest like sunlight breaking through ice. Her wolf, dormant for days, surged against her skin with sudden, violent recognition. Every nerve in her body ignited, warmth flooding through her veins until she couldn't tell where her heartbeat ended and the pounding began. No, no, it's impossible. It can't be. Above her, King Eric Ashford inhaled sharply. The sound echoed through the silent hall, loud as a thunderclap. Gold bled into his dark irises, spreading like liquid fire until his eyes burned amber. A low, possessive growl rumbled from his throat, the vibration of it reaching Nova's bones, freezing every courtier in place. Mate. The word rang through her mind with ancient certainty. Her wolf knew. Her blood knew. Her treacherous, trembling body knew what her mind screamed to deny. The monster king was her mate, and she was carrying another man's child. Eric rose from his throne. The movement was slow, deliberate. Each step down from the dais measured with the precision of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. The courtiers scattered like leaves before a storm, pressing back against the walls, their whispers dying into terrified silence. Nova couldn't move. The chains held her in place, but it wasn't the iron that froze her. It was the weight of his gaze, golden and burning, pinning her to the marble floor with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. Her wolf pressed forward, straining against her skin with desperate recognition. The sensation was overwhelming, heat spreading through her chest, pooling in her belly, racing along her spine until her entire body hummed with awareness. She had heard stories of the mate bond, had listened to elder women describe the moment of recognition with misty eyes and secret smiles. But no one had told her it would feel like drowning, like being consumed by fire from the inside out. This can't be happening, she thought wildly. Not him. Anyone but him. But her wolf didn't care about politics or blood feuds or the baby growing in her womb. Her wolf only knew one thing. The male descending toward them was theirs. Had always been theirs. Would always be theirs. Eric stopped 3 feet away. This close, Nova could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides. His chest rose and fell with deliberately controlled breaths, as if he was fighting the same battle she was, trying to master instincts that refused to be mastered. Your name. His voice emerged rough, scraped raw by the growl still rumbling in his chest. It wasn't a question. It was a demand, wrapped in desperation he couldn't quite hide. Nova swallowed hard. Nova. Nova Ironhold. Something flickered in his golden eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. The Ironhold name carried weight here, and none of it good. She was the daughter of traitors, the tribute sent to pay for rebellion. She was enemy blood kneeling in chains at his feet, and she was his mate. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. Remove her chains. Eric's command cracked through the hall like a whip. Now. The captain who had escorted her stepped forward, confusion written across his weathered face. Your Majesty, The tribute is, I said now. Power flooded the room, not the subtle pressure of an alpha's authority, but something deeper, older. A force that pressed against Nova's eardrums and made her wolf want to bare her throat in submission. The captain dropped to his knees, fumbling for the keys at his belt. His hands shook so badly he could barely fit the iron into the locks. The chains fell away. Nova rubbed her raw wrists, too stunned to move. She should run. She should fight. She should do something other than kneel here like a rabbit frozen before a wolf. But her body refused to obey, caught in the golden snare of Eric's gaze. He extended his hand. The gesture was almost gentle, completely at odds with the raw power still crackling in the air around him. Nova stared at his palm, broad, calloused, marked with the small scars of a man who had wielded weapons since childhood. This hand had signed death warrants, had commanded armies, had perhaps even ordered the attack that killed her mother. And yet, her wolf whined, pressing against her ribs, urging her forward. Take it, that ancient instinct demanded. He's ours. Take what's ours. Nova's hand moved before her mind could stop it. Her fingers brushed his palm. The contact sent a shiver racing through her, warmth flooding her veins like honey. She heard Eric's sharp intake of breath, felt the tremor that ran through his powerful frame. When she looked up, his eyes had darkened to molten amber, his pupils blown wide with something that might have been wonder. You feel it, he said softly, not a question. She couldn't lie. The bond wouldn't let her. Yes. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The court watched in frozen silence, 100 pairs of eyes fixed on their king and the tribute woman whose hand he held like she was made of glass. Nova could feel their shock, their confusion, their fear. She shared all of it. Then Eric released her hand and stepped back. Lady Mirren. He didn't raise his voice, but somehow it carried to every corner of the hall. An older woman emerged from the crowd, her silver hair swept into an elegant twist, her face carefully neutral. Prepare the Queen's chambers for Lady Nova. The murmurs that erupted were immediate and horrified. Queen's chambers? Nova heard someone hiss. For tribute trash? Another voice, louder. Has he lost his mind? Eric's gaze swept the room, and silence fell like a blade. Anyone who has concerns about my decisions is welcome to voice them. Directly. To me. No one spoke. I thought not. He turned back to Nova, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. Lady Mirren will escort you. You'll want to rest after your journey. It was a dismissal, but a kind one. Nova rose on unsteady legs, acutely aware of the grime coating her skin, the straw still tangled in her hair. She looked like a beggar. She smelled like a cage, and the King of Ashford had just announced she would sleep in chambers meant for a queen. What game is he playing? She couldn't figure it out. Couldn't read anything in his beautiful, terrible face except that golden intensity that made her wolf want to roll over and show her belly. The bond pulled at her, urging her to step closer, to touch him again, to bury her face in his throat, and breathe in his scent until it was all she knew. Instead, she inclined her head. Not quite a bow, not quite defiance, and followed Lady Mirren from the hall. She felt Eric's gaze on her back until the doors closed between them. The Queen's chambers were a revelation. Nova stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, trying to reconcile the opulence surrounding her with the cage she'd occupied just hours before. The bed could have held 6 people comfortably, draped in midnight blue velvet embroidered with silver wolves. Candles flickered in crystal holders, casting warm light across tapestries depicting moonlit forests and running water. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to stand in, chasing away the mountain chill that had seeped into her bones during the journey. The bathing chamber is through there. Lady Mirren's voice was carefully neutral as she gestured to a side door. I've had water heated. Fresh clothes will be provided once you've refreshed. Nova caught the slight hesitation, the barely concealed distaste in the older woman's eyes. Tribute trash, those eyes said. Playing at being a queen. She couldn't blame her. An hour ago, she'd thought the same thing about herself. Thank you, Nova said quietly. Her voice felt strange in the elegant space, too rough, too common. Lady Mirren nodded once and swept from the room, leaving Nova alone with her confusion. The bath was scalding and heavenly. Nova scrubbed away 6 days of captivity, watching the water turn gray with dirt and fear. She washed her hair 3 times before it felt clean, then sank into the heat until her fingers pruned and the trembling in her limbs finally stilled. Mate. The word echoed through her mind, refusing to be silenced. Eric Ashford was her mate. The monster king, the conqueror, the man whose armies had burned through half the northern territories. He was bound to her by the oldest magic their kind knew, and she was carrying another man's child. Nova's hand drifted to her stomach beneath the water. Still flat. No one could tell yet, not by looking. But the life growing inside her was Marcus's, not Eric's. When the king discovered the truth, and he would discover it, mates couldn't keep secrets from each other forever. What would he do? Kill her? Cast her out? Tear the child from her body? Her wolf snarled at the thought, fierce and protective. He won't hurt us. He's ours. He's a killer, Nova argued silently. He's conquered a dozen packs. He executed his own uncle for treason. But the Bond didn't care about logic. The Bond only knew that Eric Ashford was hers, and she was his, and anything that threatened to separate them was an enemy to be destroyed. Nova sank deeper into the water, letting the heat seep into her aching muscles. She needed to think, needed to plan, needed to find a way to protect her baby while navigating the treacherous waters of a bond she'd never asked for. A knock at the outer door made her jolt upright. "Lady Nova?" A servant's voice, tentative and young. "The king wishes to speak with you. He's outside your chambers." Nova's heart slammed against her ribs. Already? She'd hoped for time to compose herself, to build walls between her confused feelings and her rational mind. But the Bond pulled at her, a golden thread connecting her chest to the presence she could feel just beyond the door. He was there, waiting. Her wolf practically purred with anticipation. Traitor, she thought at the animal part of herself. She dressed quickly in the clothes that had been laid out, a simple gown of dark green wool that fit her better than anything she'd owned at Ironhold. Her hair was still damp, but there was nothing to be done about that. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and opened the door. Eric stood in the corridor, alone. The absence of guards struck her first. A king should never be unaccompanied, especially not in the presence of tribute from an enemy pack. Yet here he stood, leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed over his chest, looking almost nervous. The Alpha King of Ashford nervous, Nova thought incredulously. Impossible. "May I come in?" His voice was quieter than it had been in the throne room, stripped of command. He was asking permission. Actually asking, as if her answer mattered. Nova stepped back, allowing him to enter. Eric moved into the chamber with careful steps, keeping distance between them that felt both thoughtful and painful. The Bond strained against the separation, urging her to close the gap, to touch him, to claim what was hers. She stayed where she was through sheer force of will. "I owe you an apology," he said. Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't that. An apology? The cage. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. The chains. "I didn't order those. When I requested tribute, I specified that you should be treated with dignity. My soldiers interpreted their orders differently." Nova stared at him. "You didn't know." "I know now." The captain who escorted you has been relieved of his command. Eric's eyes flashed gold briefly, anger bleeding through the controlled mask. He's lucky I didn't relieve him of his head. A strange feeling flickered through Nova's chest, not quite gratitude, not quite relief. Something softer, more dangerous. Why? She asked before she could stop herself. Why do you care how I was treated? I'm tribute, a payment for crimes. Why would it matter if I arrived in chains or carried on a litter? Eric was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because before you set foot in my throne room, I thought I knew what you were. A political tool. A hostage to ensure your father's cooperation. His gaze found hers, holding it with that unnerving intensity. Then you lifted your chin, and I felt the bond snap into place, and suddenly you weren't a tool at all. You were everything. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her wolf surged with triumph, with joy, with desperate need. Mine, that primitive voice howled. He feels it too. He's ours. But Nova had spent too long surviving to surrender to instinct. You don't know me, she said quietly. The bond doesn't mean... I know you're brave. Eric took a step closer, still maintaining distance, but close enough that she could smell him. Pine and wood smoke and something darker, wilder. The scent made her head spin. I know you walked into my throne room in chains, expecting to die, and you still met my eyes like an equal. I know your wolf is strong enough to resist the pull between us even now, when every instinct must be screaming at you to close this distance. He was right. Every instinct was screaming exactly that. I also know you're afraid, he continued, of me, of this place, of what I might do to you. Another step, and now he was close enough to touch if she reached out. She didn't. I won't hurt you, Nova. Not ever. I need you to believe that. How can I? The words tore from her throat, raw and honest. Your soldiers killed my mother. Your kingdom has bled my pack dry for 3 years, and now I'm here, in your palace, wearing your clothes, sleeping in your dead queen's chambers. My dead mother's chambers, Eric corrected quietly. I've never had a queen. The correction silenced her. She hadn't considered, hadn't thought. I've been waiting, he said, and something in his voice cracked open, revealing a vulnerability she wouldn't have believed possible in the monster from the stories. 30 years, and no mate. My council thought I should choose a political match, secure alliances through marriage, but I couldn't. Something in me knew. Knew what? That you were out there. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek, feather-light. Somewhere. Waiting. The touch sent warmth cascading through her veins. Her wolf pressed forward, practically purring with satisfaction. Nova's breath caught in her throat. Tell him about the baby, a voice whispered. Tell him now, before this goes further. But the words wouldn't come. Fear locked them in her chest, fear of what he might do, what he might become. The gentle man before her could turn monstrous in an instant if he learned she carried another male's child. Eric's thumb traced her cheekbone, his expression soft with wonder. You will never be locked in, he said quietly, and no one enters without your permission, including me. This is your space, Nova, your sanctuary. I won't violate it. He stepped back, and the loss of contact felt like a physical wound. Rest tonight, he said. Tomorrow I'll show you the palace. Help you find your footing. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, the first she'd seen from him. And perhaps convince you that I'm not quite the monster your father's stories painted me to be. Then he was gone, slipping through the door and closing it behind him with a soft click. Nova stood in the center of the beautiful room, her hand pressed to the cheek he'd touched, feeling the phantom warmth of his fingers against her skin. He's kind, she thought, dazed. The Monster King is kind. Her wolf settled in her chest, content for the first time in days. But in her belly, the secret that could destroy everything continued to grow. Nova slept poorly that night, dreams tangled with golden eyes and the phantom warmth of Eric's touch on her cheek. When dawn light finally crept through the tall windows, painting the midnight blue chambers in shades of rose and amber, she lay still for a long moment, her hand pressed flat against her stomach. The child growing there remained her most dangerous secret. She rose and dressed in another gown from the wardrobe, this one a deep burgundy that made her feel like she was wearing wine. The fabric was finer than anything she'd owned at Ironhold, and she caught herself smoothing her palms over the skirt, marveling at the softness. A knock came at the door, soft and respectful. "Enter," Nova called, her voice steadier than she felt. It was Lady Mirren, the silver-haired woman from the night before. Her expression remained carefully neutral, but Nova caught the way her gaze swept over the untouched bed linens, the way her lips pressed together with something that might have been approval. "The king has requested your presence at breakfast, my lady," Mirren said. "If you are amenable." The phrasing struck Nova. If she was amenable, as if she had a choice. Perhaps she did. "I'll come," Nova said. Mirren led her through corridors of black stone and silver light, past tapestries depicting hunts and battles, past windows that looked out over gardens still heavy with morning mist. The obsidian palace was beautiful in a cold, sharp way, all angles and edges, nothing soft. And yet flowers grew in window boxes, and servants smiled as they passed, and the air smelled of baking bread rather than blood. It was not what she had expected. None of this was. The breakfast room was smaller than the throne room but still grand, with a long table of dark wood and chairs carved with running wolves. Eric sat at the head, morning light catching the angles of his face, and when Nova entered, he rose immediately. "Good morning." His voice was warm, careful. "Did you sleep?" "Some," Nova admitted. He pulled out the chair beside his own, not across from him, where she might have expected a guest or prisoner to sit. Beside him, close enough that when she lowered herself into the seat, she caught his scent again, that dizzying blend of pine and smoke and wild things. Her wolf stretched beneath her skin, content. Breakfast was laid out in abundance: fresh bread and honeyed butter, eggs and cold meats. Fruits she didn't recognize. Nova's stomach clenched with hunger, but also with nausea, the constant companion of her pregnancy, worse in the mornings. She reached for bread, hoping it would settle her stomach without raising questions. Eric watched her with those golden eyes, too perceptive by half. "If you need anything specific, you have only to ask. The kitchens will prepare whatever you wish." This is more than enough. More than she'd seen in months, honestly. Ironhold's tribute payments had left little excess for the family table. They ate in silence for a few moments, and Nova used the time to study him through lowered lashes. He moved with controlled grace, every gesture deliberate, a king who had learned to be watched. But there was tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his mouth that suggested he was as uncertain as she was. The thought was strangely comforting. "I wanted to discuss," Eric began, just as the door swung open. The woman who entered moved like silk over water, all fluid grace and calculated beauty. Dark hair tumbled past her shoulders in artful waves, and her gown was the pale blue of winter ice, cut to emphasize curves that were undeniably impressive. But it was her eyes that caught Nova's attention, pale gray and sharp as broken glass, fixed on Eric with possessive intensity. "My king." The woman's voice was honey and venom in equal measure. "Forgive my interruption. I heard there was a guest and wanted to offer my welcome." Eric's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Lady Lila, I don't recall summoning you." Must I be summoned to greet a new member of your household? Lila's smile didn't reach her eyes. We are practically family, after all. Your council has been discussing our betrothal for months. The words hit Nova like ice water. Betrothal. Council discussions. Of course there was someone beautiful and noble and appropriate. Someone who hadn't arrived in chains with a traitor's blood and another man's child growing in her belly. Her wolf snarled, sudden and vicious. Ours. He is ours. But Nova forced the reaction down, kept her face smooth. She had no claim here. The bond meant nothing if Eric chose to honor prior arrangements. There is no betrothal, Eric said flatly. There never was. The council entertained possibilities. I entertained nothing. Lila's smile flickered just for an instant before smoothing back into place. Of course, my king. A misunderstanding. Her gray eyes slid to Nova, taking her measure with undisguised assessment. And you must be the tribute from Ironhold, the traitor's daughter. Nova, Eric said, and there was warning in his voice now, the rumble of an alpha defending territory. Her name is Lady Nova, and she is under my protection. Under your protection, Lila repeated, and something ugly flashed behind her careful expression. How generous of you. She swept closer, and Nova forced herself not to flinch as that cutting gaze raked over her, assessing, calculating, finding her wanting. You must be so grateful, Lila murmured. Pulled from the ashes of your ruined pack and given shelter in the king's own palace. Some might say you've risen quite above your station. Some might say, Nova replied, keeping her voice level. That station is less important than character. Lila's eyes narrowed. For a long moment the two women stared at each other, and Nova felt the tension crystallize between them, the kind of enmity that wouldn't end with words. How charmingly provincial! Lila's laugh was musical and cruel. I'm sure you'll find our court most educational. She turned back to Eric, dismissing Nova completely. I'll leave you to your breakfast, my king, but perhaps later we might discuss the Northern Territory disputes. Your generals have been asking for your guidance. Lord Commander Wraith handles military matters, Eric said coldly. As you well know. Of course. Another smile, another graceful turn, and Lila glided toward the door. But she paused at the threshold, casting one last look over her shoulder. Welcome to Ashford, Lady Nova. I do hope your stay proves survivable. The door closed behind her. Nova released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I apologize for that. Eric's voice had gone rough, his jaw tight with anger. Lady Lila Stormborn has been a fixture at court since my father's time. Her family controls significant territory in the Western Reaches, and she's grown accustomed to a certain influence. She expects to be your queen, Nova said quietly. She expects many things she will never receive. Eric reached out, hesitated, then let his hand fall short of touching her. You're shaking. She was. Nova pressed her palms flat against her thighs, willing them to still. I'm fine. You're not. He leaned closer, voice dropping. Listen to me. Whatever Lila says, whatever games she tries to play, you're not a guest here on Sufferance. The bond between us changes everything. You have every right to be at this table, in these halls, at my side. The bond doesn't erase who I am, Nova said. A traitor's daughter. Enemy blood. I understand why someone like her would see me as a threat. You're not enemy blood. Something fierce blazed in Eric's golden eyes. You're mine. The word sent heat cascading through her veins. Her wolf howled agreement, pressing against her ribs with desperate intensity. Yes. His. Ours. But in her belly, the secret continued to grow. The days that followed took on a strange rhythm. Eric showed her the palace as promised, The great library with its 1,000 leather-bound volumes, the training grounds where warriors sparred with blunted steel, the gardens where roses bloomed despite the approaching autumn chill. He introduced her to his generals and advisors, his household staff and kitchen workers, always with that same phrase, "Lady Nova is under my protection." The words became a shield, a warning, and through it all, Nova felt Lila's eyes on her, watching, waiting. The woman appeared at every meal, every court function, every moment when Eric's attention might stray to Nova. Her comments were always perfectly calibrated, barbed enough to wound, but never quite crossing into open insult. Death by 1,000 cuts. Poor thing, you must find our customs so confusing. That gown is quite bold. Not everyone has the breeding to carry off such a statement. I hear Ironhold wolves are practically feral. Do you find it difficult adjusting to civilization? Nova bore it in silence, refusing to give Lila the satisfaction of a reaction, but each comment was a reminder. She didn't belong here, would never belong here. The mate bond might be real, but that didn't mean she'd earned her place. And then there was the pregnancy. The nausea worsened as the days passed. She found herself refusing breakfast more often than not, accepting only dry bread and weak tea. Certain scents made her stomach lurch: cooked meat, strong wine, the particular perfume that one of the serving maids wore. Eric noticed. Of course he noticed. "You're not eating," he said one evening, when the court dinner had ended and they walked together through the moonlit gardens. His hand hovered near the small of her back, protective without quite touching. "The kitchen can prepare whatever you need. Anything at all. I'm simply not hungry," Nova lied. He stopped walking, turning to face her. The moonlight caught his features, turning them silver and shadow, achingly beautiful. "Nova, please. Whatever is troubling you, whatever you're keeping from me, I want to help." The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache. "Tell him," that inner voice urged. "Tell him about the baby. He'll find out eventually. Better now, when you can control the telling." But the fear was stronger. 3 weeks in his palace, and she had come to know Eric Ashford, not as the monster from the stories, but as a man who valued honesty above almost all else, who had executed his own uncle for deception, who had conquered a dozen packs through ruthless, unflinching force. What would he do when he learned his fated mate carried another man's child? "I'm just tired," Nova said softly. "The adjustment. It's a great deal to take in." Eric studied her for a long moment, those golden eyes seeing too much. But he didn't push, simply nodded and resumed walking and let his hand finally rest against her back, warm and solid and terrifying in its gentleness. "When you're ready to tell me," he said quietly, "I'll listen." The attack came on a quiet morning. Nova had developed a habit of taking tea in the small solar attached to her chambers, a private space where she could be alone with her thoughts and her growing belly. Lady Mirren brought her usual tray: dry bread, chamomile tea, a small pot of honey. But this morning there was something different. An additional cup, delicate porcelain painted with silver wolves, and a small card that read, "A traditional blessing for the king's chosen, from the ladies of the court." The tea smelled sweet, too sweet. Nova lifted the cup to her lips, then paused. Something prickled at the back of her mind, a memory, hazy and half-formed. Her mother, years ago, teaching her to identify herbs in the forest behind Ironhold Keep. This one heals, this one harms, and this one, little one, kills wolves slowly, from the inside out. Wolfsbane. The scent was faint, masked beneath honeyed chamomile, but unmistakable once she recognized it. Nova's blood went cold. She set the cup down with trembling fingers. Someone had just tried to kill her. But as she sat there, terror giving way to cold clarity, a worse realization dawned. Wolfsbane was a poison that targeted wolves, their healing abilities, their strength, their connection to their animal halves. It was often used against pregnant wolves because the babies were more vulnerable than their mothers. Whoever had sent this tea hadn't been trying to kill her. They'd been trying to kill her child. Nova's hand pressed against her still flat stomach, and for the first time since she'd discovered the pregnancy, she felt a surge of fierce protective fury. This was her baby. Whatever its origins, however complicated the situation, she would not let anyone harm it. She looked at the card again. From the ladies of the court. But there was only one lady who had been watching her every move. Only one who had the motive and the means. Only one whose gray eyes tracked her with venomous hatred. Lila Stormborn. Nova rose from her chair, the poisoned tea forgotten on the table. Her wolf pressed against her skin, snarling for blood, but she forced herself to think clearly. She had no proof. Nothing but a cup of tea and her own certain knowledge. If she accused Lila without evidence, it would be the word of a tribute against a highborn lady with generations of influence. She needed to be smart, she needed to be strategic, and she needed to decide, right now, whether she was going to keep running from her secrets or finally face them. Her hand pressed harder against her stomach. Inside, her baby grew, innocent of politics, ignorant of danger, completely dependent on her protection. The choice crystallized in her mind. She would not hide anymore, would not cower and pray and hope that no one discovered the truth. Lady Lila Stormborn had just made a fatal error. She had threatened Nova's child. And Nova, daughter of traitors and carrier of secrets, was about to show the court of Ashford exactly what a desperate mother could do. She swept toward the door, the poisoned cup clutched in her hand. It was time for a reckoning. Nova's footsteps echoed through the corridors like a war drum. The poisoned cup burned against her palm, evidence of betrayal wrapped in delicate porcelain. Servants scrambled from her path, their eyes wide at the sight of her, hair loose, gown wrinkled from sleep, expression carved from stone. She knew where Lila would be. The woman held court every morning in the Eastern Solar, surrounded by her sycophants and admirers, dispensing gossip like poison from a gilded cup. How fitting. The doors to the Solar stood open, and Nova heard Lila's crystalline laugh before she saw her. A dozen noblewomen clustered around the lady, their heads bent together in conspiracy. When Nova appeared in the doorway, silence fell like a blade. "Lady Nova?" Lila's smile was a perfect mask of courtesy. "What an unexpected pleasure. We were just discussing the autumn festival preparations. Perhaps you'd like to join this tea." Nova held up the cup, her voice cutting through the pretense. "You sent it to my chambers this morning." Something flickered in Lila's gray eyes. Surprise, quickly smothered. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean. The ladies of the court often send blessings to—" "It contains wolfsbane." The Solar erupted in whispers. The noblewomen drew back from Lila like she'd transformed into something venomous, their faces painted with shock that might have been genuine or might have been survival instinct. Lila's composure cracked, just slightly. "That's a very serious accusation. Wolfsbane is a controlled substance, and I would never—" "You would." Nova stepped further into the room, her wolf pressing against her skin with savage approval. "You've been waiting for your moment since I arrived. Watching me. Measuring me. Deciding how best to eliminate the obstacle between you and the throne you believe you deserve. I don't have to listen to this." Lila rose, her skirts rustling with agitation. "You're nothing but tribute trash with delusions of grandeur. The mate bond doesn't make you queen. It makes you a convenient vessel. And when Eric realizes—" "When Eric realizes what?" The voice came from behind Nova, and every person in the room went still. King Eric Ashford stood in the doorway, his golden eyes burning with barely contained fury. Lord Commander Wraith flanked him, along with a dozen guards, drawn no doubt by the commotion Nova had caused in her march through the palace. "My king!" Lila dropped into a curtsy, but her voice trembled. "This woman has made wild accusations." "I heard." Eric moved to Nova's side, his presence a wall of heat and protective rage. "Show me." Nova handed him the cup. He lifted it to his nose, inhaled once, and his expression hardened into something terrifying. "Wolfsbane," he confirmed, masked with honey and chamomile, but unmistakable. His gaze swung to Lila. "You sent this to my mate's chambers." "I didn't. There must be some mistake. Someone must have tampered." "Enough." The single word silenced Lila's babbling. Eric's power flooded the room, pressing against everyone present until some of the noblewomen sank to their knees. "Lord Commander, search Lady Lila's chambers. Find the source of this poison." "You have no right!" Lila's composure shattered completely. "My family has served the Ashford crown for generations. My grandfather bled for your father. You cannot—" "I can do whatever I wish." Eric's voice was ice. "You seem to have forgotten that, Lady Lila. You seem to have forgotten a great many things." "She's lying." Lila pointed at Nova, desperation making her reckless. "She's manipulated you from the moment she arrived. The mate bond isn't real. It can't be real. She's nobody. Enemy blood. And she's—" Lila's lips curved into something ugly. "She's carrying another man's child. Did she tell you that, my king? Your precious mate was already pregnant when she arrived. That bastard in her belly belongs to some common wolf from her traitor pack." The Solar went deadly silent. Nova felt the words strike her like physical blows, felt the secret she'd guarded so carefully ripped into the open. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, and she saw Eric's gaze track the movement. "Is this true?" His voice held no emotion, no indication of what he felt. Nova could have lied, could have denied everything, dismissed Lila's accusation as more desperate slander. But she thought of Eric's uncle, executed for deception. Thought of the man who valued honesty above all else. She would not build their bond on falsehood. "Yes." The word emerged steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "I discovered the pregnancy on the journey here. The father was a beta from a neighboring pack. A few stolen moments before I knew I would be sent as tribute. I didn't tell you because I was afraid." She lifted her chin, meeting Eric's golden gaze without flinching. "I was afraid you would kill me, or the baby, or both. You see?" Lila's voice rang with triumph. "She admits it. She's been lying to you from the start, carrying some mongrel's spawn while pretending—" "Silence." Eric's command cracked through the room. He hadn't looked away from Nova, his expression unreadable. "Everyone out. Now." The Solar emptied in seconds, noble women fleeing like startled birds. Only Lila remained, held in place by guards who had materialized at Eric's gesture. "You too," Eric said to them. "Wait outside. She goes nowhere." When they were alone, just Nova, Eric, and Lila, the silence stretched like a blade. "I should have told you," Nova said quietly, "from the first moment. But I was a prisoner in chains, and you were the monster from my nightmares, and You thought I would hurt you." Eric's voice was rough. "Hurt an innocent child?" "Yes." He closed his eyes briefly, something painful crossing his features. "And now? After 3 weeks? After everything I've shown you? Now I know you wouldn't." Nova stepped closer, drawn by the pull of the bond despite everything. "Now I know you're not the monster from the stories, but Lila forced my hand before I could find the right moment, the right words. You were going to tell me." It wasn't a question. "Yes. Tonight, I think. Or tomorrow." "I couldn't keep carrying the weight of it." Her hand pressed harder against her stomach. "This child isn't yours by blood, but I would never ask you to claim something that isn't—" "Stop." Eric crossed the remaining distance between them, his hands coming up to cup her face with devastating gentleness. "Look at me, Nova." She looked. "That child," he said slowly, each word weighted with intention, "is growing inside my mate. My fated mate, who I have waited 30 years to find. My mate who walked into my throne room in chains and met my eyes with defiance instead of fear." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "The child's blood doesn't matter. What matters is that you chose to tell me the truth, even when it cost you, even when you thought it might destroy everything." "Eric, I would have been angry if you'd kept lying," he admitted. "The deception would have wounded us both. But you didn't. When it mattered most, when you had every reason to protect yourself with silence, you chose honesty." His forehead touched hers. "That is worth more than bloodlines." Behind them, Lila made a sound of pure, uncomprehending rage. "This is wrong. She's nothing. A traitor's daughter carrying a bastard child, and you're going to, what? Make her your queen? Let her mongrel offspring inherit—" "There it is." Eric turned, placing himself between Nova and Lila with deliberate precision. "The real objection, not concern for the crown or the kingdom, just jealousy and thwarted ambition. I have served this court my entire life." Lila's composure shattered completely. "I was supposed to be your Luna. Everyone knew it. My family has bled for yours for generations, and you would cast us aside for this. You tried to murder my mate's child." Eric's voice went flat and terrible. "You put wolfsbane in her tea, knowing exactly what it would do to a pregnant wolf. You didn't care if Nova herself died, as long as the baby was eliminated. That bastard isn't yours. It's a stain on the Ashford bloodline, a weakness that— Enough!" Power crashed through the room, and Lila stumbled backward, her face going white. "You have confessed to attempted murder of the future Luna's child. Before witnesses." He gestured to the doorway, where guards and courtiers had begun to gather despite his orders. "Before the entire court, as it happens." Lila's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She looked around wildly, seeing the faces of those who had witnessed her admission, and something in her finally crumbled. "Please," she whispered. "Eric, please. I've known you since you were a boy. I've loved you." "You've loved the throne," he said coldly. "You've loved the power you imagined you would wield. You never knew me at all." His claws extended, glinting in the morning light. "The traditional punishment for attempted murder of royal blood is execution." "No." Lila fell to her knees. "No, please. I'll do anything. I'll leave court. I'll— exile." Nova's voice cut through Lila's desperate pleading. Eric turned, one eyebrow raised. "Exile," Nova repeated, stepping forward to stand beside her mate. "Let her live with her failure. Let her spend the rest of her years knowing that the woman she called tribute trash showed her more mercy than she deserved." Eric studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his golden eyes. Respect, perhaps. Admiration. The kind of love that burned slow and true, building on foundations of strength rather than beauty or convenience. "Lady Lila Stormborn," he announced, his voice carrying to every witness gathered at the door. "You are hereby banished from Ashford territory. Your family's holdings in the western reaches are forfeit to the crown. You will leave this palace within the hour and never return. If you set foot in any territory under my protection, you will be executed on sight." Guards moved forward, grasping Lila's arms and hauling her upright. She looked at Nova with pure, unfiltered hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You think you've won, but the court will never accept you. You'll always be the tribute whore who— Get her out of my sight." Eric's command sent the guards moving, dragging Lila toward the door. Her screams echoed down the corridor, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. The Solar fell silent, Nova stood very still, her heart pounding with the aftermath of everything that had just happened. She had faced down her enemy. She had told the truth about her pregnancy. And Eric. Eric had chosen her anyway. He turned to face her, and she saw the same realization dawning in his golden eyes. "It's over," he said softly. "Is it?" Her voice trembled slightly. "The court heard everything. They know about the baby." The court heard their king defend his mate. Eric reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "They heard me claim you, publicly and completely, and they will accept it, because I will brook no other outcome." Just like that. Just like that. He tugged her closer until her body pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. "Nova, I need you to understand something." "What?" "When the healers confirm the wolfsbane has left your system," his hand slid down to rest over her stomach with possessive tenderness. "I want to claim you properly, the marking, the bond completed." His voice roughened. "I have waited 30 years for you. I will not wait a moment longer than necessary." Heat flooded through Nova's veins, her wolf howling agreement. "The healers have already confirmed it," she whispered. "Lady Mirren checked after we identified the poison. I never actually ingested any, just lifted the cup to my lips before I smelled it." Eric went very still. "Say that again." "I'm not poisoned." Nova's breath caught as his eyes flared gold. "The baby is fine. I'm fine." The sound that emerged from Eric's throat was barely human, a growl of pure, possessive need that vibrated through every inch of Nova's body. His hands tightened on her waist, and she found herself being guided backward, out of the solar and through corridors that blurred past in a haze of anticipation. They reached his chambers. Not hers. His. The distinction mattered, and Nova understood it without being told. This was where he slept, where he was most vulnerable, where he had never allowed another to enter. Until now. The doors closed behind them, and Eric pressed her against the solid wood, his body a wall of heat and desperate restraint. "I need to hear you say it," he managed, his voice strained. "I need to know you want this, that you choose this, choose me." "I choose you." The words came easily, because they were true. Had been true for longer than she'd been willing to admit. My wolf knew from the moment our eyes met in the throne room. I was just too afraid to listen. And now? Now I'm done being afraid. Eric made a sound like something breaking, like chains shattering, and his mouth found hers. The kiss consumed her. There was no gentleness in it, no restraint. Just 30 years of longing finally finding its target, and Nova answered in kind. Her fingers tangled in his dark hair, pulling him closer, drinking in the taste of him like she'd been dying of thirst her entire life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eric guided her to the massive bed that dominated his chambers. Nova went willingly, pulling him down with her until his weight pressed her into silk sheets that smelled of pine and smoke, and something uniquely his. "The marking," he said against her throat. "I need to, Nova, I need." "Yes." She tilted her head, baring the junction of her neck and shoulder where the claiming bite would go. "Do it. Make me yours." Eric shuddered above her. His lips traced down her throat, leaving trails of fire in their wake, and when he reached the spot, that perfect vulnerable spot where her pulse fluttered, he paused. "This will hurt," he whispered. "Just for a moment." "I know." His teeth sank in. Pain exploded through her, sharp and bright and overwhelming. But beneath it, through it, something else surged. The bond that had been humming between them since that first moment in the throne room roared to life, flooding her with sensations she couldn't name. She felt Eric, not just his body against hers, but his emotions, his thoughts, his very soul pouring into the space between them. She felt his fear that she would reject him, his desperate hope that she wouldn't. his overwhelming, bone-deep love that had been building since the moment she lifted her defiant chin in his throne room. The pain transformed, bleeding into pleasure so intense it stole her breath. Her back arched, a cry escaping her throat, and Eric held her through it all, his teeth still locked in her flesh, the bond singing between them like a living thing. When he finally released her, licking the wound closed with gentle strokes, Nova was trembling. Mine. He breathed against her marked skin. My mate. My Luna. My everything. Not yet. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. Not until I mark you, too. Eric's eyes flared gold. He rolled onto his back, pulling her on top of him, baring his own throat with an expression of such vulnerable trust that it made her heart ache. Then make me yours, Nova Ironhold. Finish what we started. She didn't hesitate. Her teeth found the junction of his neck and shoulder, and she bit down with all the strength her wolf could muster. Eric's body went rigid beneath her, a low groan escaping his chest, and the bond roared again, this time flowing from her to him, showing him everything she'd been too afraid to say. Her terror at being sent as tribute, her desperate protectiveness of the baby growing inside her, her gradual, reluctant realization that the monster king was actually a man worth loving, and finally, her complete surrender to the bond between them. When she released him, Eric was shaking. Yours, she whispered against his marked skin. My mate, my king, my everything. He pulled her down, cradling her against his chest, and they lay tangled together in the aftermath. The bond settled between them like something physical, golden and warm and eternal, a thread connecting their hearts that nothing could ever sever. The baby, Eric said softly, his hand finding her stomach once more. I meant what I said. Blood doesn't matter. This child will be mine in every way that counts. Even though, especially because, he pressed a kiss to her forehead. You protected this baby when you had no reason to believe anyone would help you. You faced down poison and court politics and your own fears, all to keep this child safe. That makes you the mother my kingdom needs. And that makes this baby mine to love and raise and protect. Tears pricked at Nova's eyes. I don't deserve you. You deserve far better than me. Eric's laugh was soft, self-deprecating. But I plan to spend the rest of our lives trying to be worthy of you anyway. 3 months later, Nova stood beside Eric in the great hall of the Obsidian Palace, her hand resting on her rounded belly. The Pax had united under their rule. Even Ironhold, whose alpha had been stripped of his title and replaced with a council of elders that included Nova's brother Caden. Roderick Ironhold had been given a choice: exile or execution. Nova had argued for mercy, despite everything, and her father now lived as a peasant farmer in the Eastern Territories, stripped of rank, stripped of power, but alive. It was more than he deserved, and everyone knew it. Vera had not been given the same choice. Her conspiracy with Lila, uncovered during the investigation into the poisoning, had earned her a place in Ashford's dungeons. Nova visited sometimes, though she never spoke. Just stood outside the cell and let Vera see what her cruelty had wrought. The tribute trash ascending to Queen, the unwanted stepdaughter finally finding home. You're smiling, Eric murmured, his arm sliding around her waist as the court gathered for the evening feast. What are you thinking about? Justice, Nova admitted. And how strange it is that the worst thing my father ever did, sending me here in chains, led me to the only place I've ever truly belonged. Eric pressed a kiss to her hair, and their daughter kicked between them, strong and healthy, and utterly perfect. After the feast, Nova found Eric in his study, bent over a leather journal she'd never seen before. He looked up as she entered, something almost shy crossing his features. What's that? She asked. In answer, he turned the journal toward her. Page after page of sketches, Nova sleeping, her hair spread across a pillow. Nova laughing, her head thrown back. Nova standing in the garden, one hand resting on her growing belly. I started the day after you arrived, Eric confessed. I couldn't stop looking at you, couldn't stop thinking about you. Every council meeting, I was sketching your face in the margins. Every sleepless night, I was trying to capture the exact way the moonlight caught your hair. Nova sank into the chair beside him, her throat tight with emotion. She turned the pages slowly, watching her own story unfold in charcoal and ink, the frightened tribute becoming a fierce Luna, the pregnant stranger becoming a cherished mate. I thought you married me out of duty, she whispered, because the bond demanded it, because your kingdom expected it. I married you because I love you. Eric took her hands, his golden eyes burning with intensity. I have loved you since the moment you lifted your defiant chin in my throne room. Before I knew about the baby. Before I knew your secrets. Before any of it. You walked into my palace in chains and made me feel human for the first time in 30 years. Nova leaned forward, pressing her lips to his, tasting the truth of his words. I love you too, she said against his mouth. I think I have since you left my door unlocked that first night. Since you showed me I wasn't a prisoner, even when I was sure I was. Their daughter kicked again, and Eric's hand found Nova's belly with practiced ease. They stayed like that as the night deepened, the Monster King and his tribute queen, building a future neither of them had dared to imagine. Outside, the obsidian palace gleamed beneath the stars. Inside, a bond burned golden and eternal, two souls finally home,